Good morning. My name is Linda Best. I'm president of the Contra Costa Council, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here today for this very important session about budget reform with Governor Schwarzenegger. This is an important issue for all of us. The budget deficits, both at the state and local level, impact all of us, no matter what sector of the economy we're from. So we're pleased to have this opportunity to hear from the governor about his suggestions for moving forward. I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgments. We have with us here today Assemblyman Mark DeSaulnier and Supervisor John Joya, County Supervisor. And I'd also like to acknowledge Steve Lesher, who's the chair of my organization and has done a wonderful job leading us this year. Steve. And now it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Mayor John Hancock, City of Pleasant Hill, and he's going to introduce the governor.
Thank you, Linda. It is my honor and my distinct pleasure to, on behalf of the entire community of Pleasant Hill, to welcome, along with, we have our Mayor Abram Wilson from San Ramon, our Mayor Bill Shin from Concord, and all the elected officials from Contra Costa County. I would like to welcome you today and enjoy and look forward to hearing the words you have to say today. In addition, there's a small little link between the governor and Pleasant Hill many people don't know about. In fact, I'm not even sure. But the governor and wife, Maria Shriver, are very involved with Special Olympics, which was, of course, founded by the governor's mother-in-law, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, in 1986. And what we wanted to do was let them know that our police department is very involved in the issue of Special Olympics, with our retired Lieutenant Pratt, now a Regional 7 Director for the Torch Run, overseeing Western United States and Guam, and our Chief of Police and responsible for Northern California's efforts with the Torch Run and raising funds. And so we're very involved with that, and that's one of the links between Pleasant Hill and our governor. So without further ado, we just wanted to thank the governor for coming to Pleasant Hill and Contra Costa today, and to look forward to the remarks. So thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor, and Linda, thank you very much for the nice talk. And I want to thank all of you for being here today, and the other elected officials that are here today, and very important business leaders that are here today. I really appreciate that. I'm on the way going up and down the state to talk about the budget, because this is something that is extremely important to the state. And, of course, on January 10th, as you remember, I had my budget presentation, where we talked about the bad news that this year we are a few $billion short of our revenues, and if we continue and don't do anything, then by the next fiscal year we will be, meaning 2008, 2009, we will be short $14.5 billion. So there's a deficit of $14.5 billion. Now this is something that we have to solve, and budget, whenever you talk about a balanced budget, someone once said balancing a budget is like going to heaven. I mean, everyone wants to get there, but no one wants to do what it takes to get there. So that's exactly also the case here in California. It's not an uncommon thing. Other states have the same problems. Now, this year, of course, we have a big problem because the economy has also slowed down. But that's not really our problem. Our problem, because that has created a shortfall in our revenues of around $5 billion this year. But what the real problem is that we don't know how to deal with this $5 billion shortfall. The only idea that most of them come up with, or some of them come up with, is raise taxes. But you can't go every time you have a shortfall in revenue and every time you have an economic slowdown, raise taxes. It doesn't make any sense. Eventually you get to 100%. We've seen in the past, Ronald Reagan has raised taxes, and then afterwards Pete Wilson raised taxes. He handed over the budget to Gray Davis. And then in 2002, 2003, they wanted to raise taxes again. Of course, they couldn't, but they couldn't make the cuts either. So it is each time we have this problem, we shouldn't be going to the people and say, let's raise taxes. We know that there's always an economic slowdown. And then there's economics, where the economy goes up. We know there's the budget shortfalls, and we know that there's spiking revenues. All of those things we know happen. It happened in the past, and it will happen in the future. But what we really need to do is figure out, how do we fix that? How do we prepare ourselves, since we know every 5-6 years we have this downturn in the economy, and therefore a downturn in revenues? How do we protect ourselves from that? I mean, it's no different than seeing an intersection and you see accidents happening and people getting killed. You say, let's do something about that. Let's go and put traffic lights up there. Well, the same is with the budget. We know that it's going to happen. How do we prepare ourselves? Well, the way you prepare yourself in business and at home is you put a rainy day fund aside. You say, when things go well, let's not spend all of that money. Let's go put some of that money aside so when things are not going so well, we have some money to supplement our revenues. That's not what has happened in the last few decades in California. As a matter of fact, this is why I have some of the charts here so I can show to you of what happens here. You see that the spending and the revenues have no relationship at all. You see revenues, that is the green line, and the yellow is the spending line. No relationship at all. Here in early 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, you can see the revenues are flat, but the spending continues. So what did the legislators do in Sacramento? They borrowed, and they took money, and they stole money from everywhere. They grabbed money from transportation. They grabbed money from local government, started ripping off local government. Then they took money from the pension. And all of this went on, so the future will pay for it. It is not a way to deal. Then I came into office. Fortunately, the economy took off again, and now the two lines are together. But now, as you can see, it's flattening out again, the economy and the revenues, and the spending continues on. So the spending formulas that we have, they're automatic spending formulas. They require us by next fiscal year to spend almost $112 billion. But our revenues that are going to come in will be $98 billion. So does that make sense? Now, of course, I have to admit, we can't just cut $14 billion. That's why we need a rainy day fund. If we now have an extra $5 billion to supplement the revenues, we would not have to cut education. We would not have to cut prisons or law enforcement, some of those very important programs. This is why I have suggested in my budget presentation in January that we should sit down, Democrats and Republicans, and this year not only to solve the mid-year cuts, but they recommended 3 steps. One is let's go and declare a fiscal emergency for this year and make mid-year cuts, because we have no mechanism in place right now to make mid-year cuts. So therefore, right now, as I stand here, this state is spending $600 million this month more than we take in. And next month again, and next month again, and next month again. We have been seeing this now for the last few months, that this state is spending more money than we are taking in, and there's no mechanism in place to stop that madness. We are ringing up more and more debt. That is the big problem. So now, therefore, next year we have to make the big cuts. And so people are screaming. They say, you're cutting education. Well, I have no choice. I, by law, have to balance the books. So if I only have $96 billion this year coming in, and next year maybe 98, then how much can I promise the people? Did I give them all the money for education, all the money for law enforcement, all the money for local governments, all the money for prisons? No, you can't. You only have $96 billion. So that's all the money we have. So this is why I recommend that here's just an example, that if we would have had that budget reform and had put that rainy day fund aside, look how the two lines come together. If we would have had that in place for the last 10 years. They're not perfectly together, the lines, the revenues and the spending, but they're as close as possible to come together here. Now here is an example of what happens if we don't have budget reform. Budget reform, there's two lines will separate even further. The spending goes totally out of whack, and the revenues are over here in green. Every year, this means around $10, $11 billion difference between those two lines. We cannot afford to do that. And this is why I say we should reform the budget system and put the rainy day fund aside and see, look what happens when we do that. The two lines will come together. So this is why I'm traveling up and down the state to remind people that they have to do everything they can. I have, by myself, of course, cannot do that. I need the legislators and I need the people. I need the people to be behind me 100% on this and to put the pressure on the legislators to let them know it is extremely important to not just think about the budget for the coming year, but to think also about let's never let this happen again. Because we should not send our children on a roller coaster ride. The children are upset about it. The teachers are upset about it. The parents are upset about it. Everyone, and I'm upset about it. I'm upset about it that we have to cut education because our children, our education system needs the money. We should not send our kids in our education system on a roller coaster ride. One year we give them more money than they deserve, and the next year we are taking all the money away. Right now, this year, we are over-appropriating education by $1 billion. They're getting more, $1 billion more than they should get. But next year, they have severe cuts of billions of dollars. Doesn't make any sense. So if we bring stability in and bring these two lines together, that is what we want to accomplish. I don't want to see this ever happening again. Now, you say to yourself, well, Governor, you've been in office for 4 years. Why haven't you done that already? Well, I've tried. When I came into office, as you remember, there was a recall, and the people said, let's send Arnold Schwarzenegger up there, an outsider to make changes because the insiders can't do it. And I proposed immediately when I came in a change in the budget system, to put a rainy day fund aside and to create stability. And it was voted down. Why? Because the legislators love to spend money. That's why we got into this trouble in the first place in 2003, where we had a $37 billion deficit. And finally, we now are paying back and paying off, and the people voted for the recovery bond money and all this to save us so we don't go into bankruptcy. So I knew the big problem was there's no stability in our budget system, because we have little stability with our taxing system also. We're relying so much on just the rich people that when they don't make all that money, all of a sudden the revenues take a dive. So we have to create stability, but it was voted down. So I said to myself, well, okay, the legislators have voted it down because maybe it was just too much for them. Maybe I didn't approach them the right way. Maybe I didn't go upstairs enough and talk to the leaders. Let's assume I made mistakes. Then I went to the people in 2005. We had the special election. I said, this is very important. We got to make changes because I saw then already, in 2005, that we saw the first hints that our housing market is going down and that something could happen. Let us prepare ourselves. So I went to the people and said, change this budget system. Make the lawmakers balance the books and put the rainy day fund aside. And then that was voted down. Because as you remember, there was these millions and millions of ad campaigns, television, campaigning against all of that. They just don't want to live within their means. Sacramento has a problem living within its means. So this time, I tell you, I feel a little bit better. And the reason is because Democrats and Republicans are working together much better. I've seen them accomplish extraordinary things over the last few years. Things that no one thought would be possible. I mean, just think about the workers' compensation reform. I mean, think about that. That gives $24 billion back to the businesses in California because we reduced workers' comp costs by 63%. We've seen the infrastructure, but everyone thought would not be possible. The Democrats and Republicans would get together. They got together, they sat down, and they worked it out, the infrastructure, so that now finally we are rebuilding California. They made a commitment. The people voted then for it, for $42 billion in bonds to rebuild our levees and our streets and our schools and expand our universities and all of those kind of things. So I see great work being done in Sacramento. So I think that we have a good chance that they sit down this year and they realize that we should not send these people, vulnerable citizens and kids, on this roller coaster ride. Let's create stability. That is the idea. And so I just wanted to tell you that, as I said earlier, I alone cannot do it. I need your help on this to let the legislators know, put the pressure on them. And with that, I want to open it up to questions because the idea is also I want to hear from you so we can debate over this issue and talk about this issue because I recognize the fact that it's not just my opinion that counts. I mean, we all work together. And I have also made it very clear this year that everything is on the table, that this is the only way we can solve problems is to put everything on the table and not to say, no, can't get on the table. Everything is on the table. Democrats will have ideas. Republicans will have ideas, and we start talking about it. Key thing is that we start talking about this very soon. They tell you why very soon. You would say, well, wait a minute. The budget doesn't need to be done until July 1. Well, the problem is that when you go that late, and you then decide to make certain cuts in programs, they will not take effect immediately. You see, we could not cut the whole $5 billion that we're overspending this fiscal year. We only could cut $1.2 billion, which, by the way, the legislators did a great job within 45 days, according to Prop 58. They came in and made those cuts. But we cannot cut the whole $5 billion because it takes 3 to 6 months, sometimes 9 months, to make cuts. And for instance, in education, I talked about it earlier, that money is already spent. We already hired the teachers. Everything is already done. You cannot take the whole $1.4 billion away that we are over-appropriating. So we only took $400 million away and left $1 billion in there because you can't do that. And the same is with healthcare. There's too many federal laws against that you can just cut from 1 month to the next. In prisons, if you want to lay off prison guards, it takes you 9 months to lay off prison guards. So that's impossible to just cut from 1 month to the next. So this is the reason why I say the legislators should start early with the negotiations, come in early and work all of this out now. So if you make decisions to make certain cuts, so it can have an effect by July 1, it will really start exactly at the right time. With that, I want to open it up. Yes, please.
You look great today. You look great. And I like your shoes.
Thank you.
Last time you had yellow shoelaces, but that's all right. When you came to
what is this, like a compliment with a little attack? God, I can't even believe it.
Great. You look great.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
I think what you are doing is exactly right. Exactly right, Governor. The legislators right now are so busy worrying about what office they're going to run for now, tomorrow, and 2 years from now, that takes a lot of their time, because I see that going on, and that's very disturbing to me. However, I think that if you continue to go and meet, see, we can influence the people we know immediately. I'm not going to sit on the city council and give your whole speech. You need to meet with more groups of people, ordinary people, important people, to influence the legislators. If you go to service groups, if you go to the Senior Citizen Center in Concord, 200 senior citizens come, I'll show you impacting the legislator and the way they think, because, you know, to say to prioritize, in the city of Concord, I can speak from my own personal experience, we have a 10-year budget, and we project 10 years what we're going to, where we are budgetarily, and we have 2 or 3 funds set aside, and we have regular routine programs of resurfacing streets, and we don't build anything unless we project out 10 years that we can maintain it. So we've been able to do that. It took a while, but now we're on that road and have been for several years. You don't find a pothole in Concord. So I think that rather than asking us to influence our legislators, they hear from us all the time. I tell him he's nuts all the time. He doesn't pay attention. But if you go, what did he say? I didn't hear him. 20 years of that. So they're all busy running for office. You're not running this time, so start thinking about these important things. You ain't going to get it.
There's a deal being made here.
No, there's no deal. He changes his Republican Democrat too many times. Now, I don't have a question. I am going to suggest, and who said what's your question? Shush. I'm going to suggest that you meet more with people who are inclined to go home and get on their internet and email the legislators and inundate them with what they think. We all probably sit here, listen to you. You did a marvelous job of presenting your case. And I know that from my own city experience, that's what you have to do. You have to prioritize. You don't have money to do it, you don't do it. That's simple as that. And go out and talk to the ordinary people who can influence the legislators. Not me. I'm telling Mark now, get on board. But you need to talk to the other people who will influence them. Right. Senior citizens vote. Go to the people who vote, the people who are interested in voting. That's what's important. And you look good, and you could do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I like that. I like that suggestion. And it's the reason why I think it is so good to have local leaders here, because I think it is exactly the same on the local level. Example is I was in Fresno just 2 days ago, and 2 days ago, and Mayor Autry said to me, you know, we used to have this problem in Fresno all the time, and he says now we have a rainy day fund put aside. He says, we made cuts, and we put the rainy day fund aside, and it was a huge fight, and people weren't happy. But now they're happy, because now we have $20 million set aside, and what happened to the state would not happen in Fresno ever again. So I think that cities have done that, not all cities, but I think a lot of cities have done that, and I think it's the wise way to go, and we have to do the same thing on the state level, even though it's challenging. But I think, like I said, I have great hope. And you have to agree that Democrats and Republicans are working much better together now, and there's a better feeling. It's not like this personal attack and all of those kind of things like it was in the old days. And people said to me when I went into office, they said, you will see the most challenging thing will be to get the Democrats and the Republicans together. I say, I sleep with a Democrat every night. I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, how difficult can it be, I say? So we must get them together at least on the same table. If you get them together in the same bed, I mean, it shouldn't be that. So anyway, so I think, yeah, please.
Governor, first, I'm John Joy. I'm on the Contra Costa Board of Supervisors. Thanks for coming to Contra Costa, and thanks for keeping the lines of communication open to local government. Two issues, both regarding health care. In Contra Costa, we have a very successful healthcare system. There's 2 public hospitals. The county runs 1 public hospital, and then we've bailed out another public hospital and have kept it open. It's filed for bankruptcy, and it will be coming out of bankruptcy soon. We've gotten recognition from the Department of Health Services on, in fact, a number of grants for expanding care to the uninsured. So 2 issues. At the federal level, President Bush's administration had proposed new Medicaid rules which would cut Medicaid funding to public hospitals around the country. It would result in $550 million being cut from public hospitals in the state of California, $8 million in Contra Costa. CSAC, the National Association of Counties, both the State and National Association of Public Hospitals are all against it. Recently, in a conversation with Congressman Miller, talked about how Congress can put in a veto-proof legislation a provision to block the implementation of those rules. So, one, we need your support at the federal level to lobby President Bush not to implement those new Medicaid rules, which will devastate public hospitals around the country and in California. And 2, your budget does call for a 10% reduction in Medi-Cal provider rates. That's going to affect us in Contra Costa by $2 million. Plus, it's going to mean a lot of community physicians aren't going to choose to be Medi-Cal providers, and people will have less doctors available, which means they'll go to the emergency room. They won't get preventative health care. So clearly, the message is that cut is going to impact a successful health care system and other systems around the state, and would urge you to not follow through with the 10% cut. And I know you're supportive of health care reform. We appreciate that, but these 2 are very important to us today.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that to my attention, and I want to congratulate you for the great jobs you're doing here with health care. And I'm a big believer in health care reform, as you know. I've fought now for almost 2 years for health care reform. We got very close to it. The Assembly did a great job and voted for it, and the Senate didn't because they were worried because of the budget situation, even though I still don't understand what the relationship is between the 2, because I think that the healthcare reform will be a permanent savior of billions of dollars down the line, and also it would ensure the 6.7 million people that we have in California that are uninsured right now, which is inexcusable for a state that is the golden state. We should also have the golden health care reform. And but when it comes to the federal government, I already wrote the Bush administration a letter. As a matter of fact, talked about it to Secretary Leavitt, that I'm totally against those kind of cuts that they want to make. And second of all, when it comes to the state, that is the point I'm making here about budget reform. You should never experience a 10% cut on health care. Education should never experience a 10% cut, or no one should experience any cuts, period. Because you can see that the line is always going up. Our revenues are always going up. So if we balance it and only spend, let's say, 5% a year increase in spending, and not when we have 13% increase in revenues, then we grab it all and spend it. Or do you know that in 1999, they had a revenue surge of 23%. Think about that, a revenue surge in 1 year of 23%. They were sitting there in the office in the Capitol debating for days and days, how do we spend it, rather than how do we save it. That is what's wrong with Sacramento. They spend that money every single dime. We almost have no reserves. So it is irresponsible to do a budget like that, and this is why it is important that we change it. You should never have a cut of 10%. It is crazy. But I mean, that's... No, but I mean, the point is, but I cannot go and say to you now, the problem here is that I cannot go, even though I sympathize and I don't want anyone to lose any treatments or anything, but I cannot stand here now and say, I will take care of you. Because I only have $96 billion. That's all we have in our state revenues. So I cannot promise you something that doesn't exist. If the legislators, and hopefully they get together soon, work out something where they create extra revenues, like I said, everything is on the table. Tax, someone, Liz Hill, recommended to look at, the tax loopholes and all that. I said, maybe there are tax loopholes that are not paying for the state anything anymore. They're not benefiting the state. They're not creating the jobs and all of those kind of benefits that we thought they would bring. Let's analyze it. If there's anything in there, yes, maybe they will bring extra revenues. Maybe there's other ideas. I'm open-minded to all of those things, but I would not be able to say to you, I'm going to take care of you. I wish I could, but I can't because that's the card I was dealt with. Yes.
Governor, I'm Michael Harris, member of the City Council here in Pleasant Hill. Welcome to Pleasant Hill.
Thank you.
I appreciate the fact that you recognize the fact that we need budget reform. Do you have some specific programs that you'd like to see the state initiate to actually make budget reform a real successful procedure rather than just, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but what are we going to actually do? What are you as governor and what is our legislature going to do to make sure we have this kind of budget reform so we do have balanced budgets and a rainy day fund?
What I've recommended in my budget proposal was that we do two things. One is to put a rainy day fund aside and to follow the Arkansas model, which is that if we then fall short of revenues, then there's pre-decided programs that will be cut. What's the first layer that will be cut? The second layer, to big priorities with the legislators together so they don't have to fight for a month, which happens every year. The battles go on for months about the budget, and it is a waste of time. So we can pre-decide that. And when I talk about the rainy day fund, what I'm talking about is if we see revenues surge beyond the 5%, let's say, and they're 13% again, let's not spend the 13%. Let us continue spending only 5% and put the rest of that money aside in the rainy day fund. Then next year, the same thing again and the same thing again. And all of a sudden, we will be accumulating $10 billion. And now when we have all of a sudden a hiccup and we see that our revenues are short, we now can supplement those revenues with that money. The great thing is, like I said earlier, it's not that we are taking a dive in our revenues. We have this year an increase in revenues by 1%, but we anticipated 6% increase. And our spending formulas require us to increase by 8% spending. So that's what throws everything off. We don't go down with the revenues. We are still going slightly up, as you can see right here. We are going still slightly up with our revenues. So it's not like it's like, and we are fortunate that we are in California, because California is so diversified. See, even though the housing market is getting hit heavy, the subprime mortgage crisis, the uncertainties, and all of those things, but California is powerful. California is extraordinary. I mean, we are shining in the world because we are so diversified. I mean, look at the Silicon Valley. When you look at that, the high technology, or you go down to Orange County in the green, clean technology, or you go to San Diego and you see the biotechnology. You go up to Los Angeles area and you see the entertainment business. There's a whole other economy. You go to the Central Valley and you see agriculture. I mean, it's like wherever you go, there's a different economy. That's what makes us so lucky. And that's why we are economically so strong and we can sustain this kind of punishment that we see now in the housing market, or that we have seen in the past, the dot-com bubble and all of those kind of things. California always could sustain those kind of punishments. But we got to be ready in Sacramento that we can go and knowing that this will happen, those kind of things happen, and be ready and have this kind of extra revenues aside, the rainy day fund. Sure. Yes, please.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Governor. My name is Joe Campbell, and I'm the president of the Contra Costa Water District Board of Directors. And, Governor, I want to tell you I support what you're showing us here today with the budget charts that you've put up. The district has a rate stabilization fund, and we've never suffered the cutbacks from property taxes because we don't have a property tax, and we don't get anything from the state. We have a budget when I arrived there 17 years ago of about $248 million. We're about $175 million today. And when the water sales are good, that's where the revenue comes from. We have a rate stabilization fund. When we oversell water, the money goes in there. We're not selling a lot of water right now, so the money comes out to stabilize the rate. We're a nonprofit agency, and if we were going to charge people what the cost of the water was, the rates would have to change every day because the cost changes every day. So I agree with your concept, and we practice it ourselves. I have an issue that I'm heading for Sacramento next week. I'll be meeting with Kip Lipper, your staffer, and Mark's been helping us on this issue as well, and it has to do with the old SB 1002.
Kip Lipper works for Senator Parada.
Senator Parada.
As a matter of fact.
And we're meeting with your staff,
so
too.
You should.
Yeah.
You should be coming to our office.
Well, he should be working for Senator Parada. But the SB 1002 was that piece of legislation which you've referred to as no regrets. We call it the immediate actions. That would be rock barriers in the delta behind Frank's track and stockpiled rock in the event of levee failures and so forth. It got through both houses of the legislature, and it was vetoed, and it's still alive. It's now I think it's, what is it, Mark, 1XX? I think it's called now. And Governor, we need that bill. Now, I'm not going to ask you to not cut the water district because there's nothing you can cut from us. We don't have that issue. But it's Prop 84 money, and it's Prop 1B money, and the money's available now. It's already there. I know you want reservoirs. We want them too. And we're the ones that proposed the 2 reservoirs originally. So we're supportive of that. But we need 1XX, which is already funded, and we're hoping we can get your support on that.
Well, thank you very much for asking, and you're absolutely correct. The people have voted for that. It's Proposition 84 money, and as you know, I'm a big believer in rebuilding our infrastructure when it comes to water. I think that the legislators have done a great job, and the people have done a great job for voting for $42 billion of infrastructure. But there was 3 things that they left out, which we couldn't agree on in the Capitol because it was, for some people, too big of a project. And that was water infrastructure was one of them. Prison infrastructure was the second one, and building more courthouses was the third one. I think all of those things were important because we're lagging behind on all of those things. So the legislators have decided, let's take these 4 pieces here and let's start rebuilding California. Then the following spring they went back and did a great job, and they worked out the prison reform and decided to go and build an extra 53,000 beds, which was terrific because we're having 170,000 inmates housed in a facility that's only for 100,000. So the federal judges are now down on us and our back, saying that we're going to go and put a cap on it, just the way we did with the county jails, and we're going to release a certain amounts of thousands of prisoners, which we don't want to do. So this is the big problem that we had there. Now they solved that, and now we are building prison cells and beds and all of those kind of things. Now we're in the middle of negotiating the water infrastructure. And this is going to be great because everyone is looking at it in a comprehensive way. What we want to do is we want to rebuild the delta, to save the delta once and for all. And we want to go and do its ecosystem, save its ecosystem, and also build a delivery system for water delivery, and also above the ground and below the ground water storage. So those are the things that we want to do. It makes the environmentalists happy, it makes the farmers happy, and the citizens of California happy, and all this. And we got very close last November. The only thing is the language was written in such a way that you had to go and jump through 23 loops and hoops and obstacles in order to get there to build the water storage. So the Republicans felt, wait a minute, we are getting shortchanged here. They're making it difficult for our ideas, but they're making it easy for their ideas. So now we have to rework that, and those are the negotiations that are going on. Again, you may call me an optimist or overly optimistic, but I guarantee you that I feel deep down inside that we also will get that done this year. That we will get the water done this year, and that we will get the budget system, the reform done this year. And I think that by next year also we will have a renegotiated healthcare reform bill also ready to go. So I have great hopes because I think that we have some great partners. I have some great partners at the Capitol. It's a great team. They're not always agreeing with me. You know, they have their own ideas. That's perfectly fine. In the beginning when I went into office, it was always a shock that someone would disagree with me. But I mean, because I didn't grow up the political route and I didn't, climb up that ladder. So it was, different for me. But now I understand it. There's 120 people there. Everyone has their own opinions. They're bright people. They're, really capable of making decisions. And so, we work together and we work through those difficult things and we can do it.
Now, you're not talking about the peripheral canal, are you?
I'm talking about the delivery system.
Yeah, but you're not talking about kind of circumventing and go back to the peripheral canal idea.
That is pretty much history, the way that has been recommended. But what we need is a water delivery system, because we got to deliver the water, because we need the storage. No, it's not. A delivery system is whatever it is that delivers water. But anyway, we want to get that done so that there is water in Northern California, in the Central Valley, and there is water also in Southern California. Yes, please. Exactly.
Yeah, Governor, I'm Bill Shin, the mayor of Concord, and old retired commander from the Sheriff's Department locally, 30 years. The two issues I want to talk about and you've addressed. First, let me say congratulations on the leadership, and this is the right track in my belief. The front part is the educational mode. You're on the right track. We've got to get the money to the kids. We're seeing too many kids that are not getting the benefit of the education, so we have to keep focused on that. The result of not doing that is what you're dealing with now, and that's prison reform. And I encourage you to continue on that track of prison reform. I ran Contra Costa County jails for about 12 of my 30 years in law enforcement. What we're concerned about, having served in the Public Safety Policy Committee for League of Cities, is that as you're releasing, and not you personally, but the dynamics that's causing you to release, is be very careful, and we're concerned about the number and types of inmates that are being released and where they're going to go. Because if they're not prepared to come back into the community, we're going to recycle them, which is going to cost them more money. So again, I guess my message is to continue on the track you are, get that money to the education, for our kids, because that leads and prevents the future homeless people, mental health people, and certainly the need for jails. So continue, and education in the jails is real important. I think we have to prepare people to come back in the community. Right. The 24 to 40,000 are really our citizens, whether we like it or not or acknowledge them, but they're going to come back, and we have to be prepared to live with us in a habitated fashion.
Thank you very much for your comment, and I just wanted to tell you that I totally agree with everything you said, because number one, we need to rehabilitate our inmates and get them ready when they go out, so they have the education and they have the job skills, so they can get a job when they go out, which is extremely important for us. And this is why we even added the name, not just the Department of Corrections, but Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, so that everyone that works for that department understands our priorities, which is to rehabilitate inmates. We have a problem, and why this commitment by the legislators to expand the prison system was so important is because when we get to build 53,000 new beds, now we can go and take all of those inmates that are now sleeping in those educational facilities and gymnasiums and so on, where they get normally the education and the job training. We can take them out of there and put them in the regular cells rather than having them sleep there. So this has been our problem. We have no space right now anywhere to go and train them. There's only 2 or 3 facilities that really have space, and the rest of them are overcrowded because, like I said, 170,000 and facilities that are for 100,000. That's why it's very important to expand, to build the extra beds. But you're absolutely right. Rehabilitation and training, and to get them out so we don't have this recidivism rate of 70% that we have now costs the state a fortune. And it's not fair to the community because you get people out there and they commit crimes again. And it makes it tough for law enforcement because you have to rearrest the people again and cost you extra money. So that is, you're absolutely correct. Why do we talk about, and I think some people maybe don't know, so we should remind them, did you talk about releasing prisoners? When you have a budget cut and you go and you say, well, we don't only cut in this area and in healthcare and that, also with prisons. You make across-the-board cuts. So now that means that we would have to release inmates. Of course, not just randomly, but you would release inmates. And it's again just another indication of why it is so important to reform the budget system. Because there's normally no reason. If we had just spent each year 5% an increase in revenues, the average is around the last 10 years was an increase in spending by 5.6%. 5.6% of spending increase than average. So if we would spend 5%, we would have all the money in the world to spend again this year 5% more, next year 5% more. But because when they had 23% and when we had a revenue surge just 3 years ago of 13%, they took all that money and it was spent. So that is just another reason why it is important to have a budget system reform. Thank you. Yeah.
Governor Schwarzenegger,
Please.
we really appreciate your coming here today to share your views on these important issues and hear from us. I know everybody here appreciates it. I believe we have time for a couple more questions.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, please.
Governor, welcome. I'm representing Supervisor Federal Glover, District 5 here of Contra Costa County. I'm wondering if any consideration has been given to the question of equity. Now, 10% across the board seems to certainly present a situation where equity exists. But in terms of the impact, there can be disparate impact depending on what type of organization we're speaking of. For example, 10% cut in one organization or one agency may impact 20 or 30% of their services, whereas 10% cut in another agency may impact only 5% of their services. I'm wondering if any thought has been given to sort of stratifying these cuts. I know that requires a whole lot more negotiation and makes it a little more complex, inherently so. But any thoughts on that at all?
First of all, you brought up an excellent point. And I really appreciate that question because the bottom line is that when you make the decision, of course, we have been thinking about that. The budget department that does the budget, we've been debating over this issue. Well, how do we deal with this deficit? And on the end, when we saw the different ideas, some were considered Democratic ideas and some were considered Republican ideas. And I said to myself, I don't want to get into that battle. I don't want to make something that is, that faces the whole state a political issue. It shouldn't be Democrats versus Republicans because that's not how you solve problems. It shouldn't be a Democratic program or a Republican program. This is what the Democrats vote for, this is what the Republicans vote for, this is what they like. So what I said, and I kind of overruled everyone, and I said, why don't we just cut across the board? And then let the legislators, since in the end I only do the proposal, but the budget is done by the legislators. See, mine is only a proposal. I say, here's my idea. And I step back and I said, now you come in and present your ideas. This is why it doesn't make sense when you see Senator Barada out there with the kids and saying, yeah, the governor's budget is no good. What does it say? He should come to my office. Tell me, give me his idea. Give me your idea. Come into my office and let's talk about budget. I'd love to have your ideas. So the Democrats and the Republicans will get together and they will work it out what are their priorities together. And then all of a sudden it takes me out of it so no one can accuse me that I'm a Republican and it was a typical Republican budget. Look at this. That's what I wanted to avoid. And on the end, I also wanted to just remind you that when we talk about a 10% cut, it's not a 10% cut. A 10% cut means that what is expected that we spend, let me just show you on this chart here. See, what they expect to spend, it's from that line 10% down. So it ends up like my Republican friends say always, why do you say 10%? It's only 1.9% really. I say, well, it is 10% of what is to be expected to be spent, and that's why we say 10%. So just so you understand and everyone understands what it means. Yeah. Yes, please.
Governor, my name is David Kelly. I'm a CPA in practice in Walnut Creek. I certainly support what you're proposing here. One thing I've become aware of is what I'll call the Oregon model. You talked about Arkansas. Oregon has a tax kicker law in effect, whereby if you have something like you did in 1998, by law, if the revenues exceed X percent surplus, it's distributed back to the taxpayers. So that might give you a little added angle or sizzle to your proposal.
I think, again, in theory, a wonderful idea. Brilliant. But there was one governor that did that. There was Governor Dugmajian in the 80s. He all of a sudden had extra revenues, and he felt very proud to give that money back to the taxpayers. But then, a few years later, the economy went down, and he rung up a deficit, more deficit, and more deficit, and more deficit. And by the time he handed over the administration to Pete Wilson, there was $14 billion deficit. So what good does it do? The people, one day they get asked, so what you're doing is you're taking now all the people on a roller coaster ride. You say, this year I'm going to give you money back, and next year I collect it again, and I go and ask you for a tax increase. Tax increases don't happen overnight in California, as you know, because the people are angry. We are number 12 in the amount of taxes that we pay in the nation amongst the 50 states. So people are feeling like they're paying enough taxes. It's now up to the politicians in Sacramento to manage that money well. And that we put a coherent system together so that we have stability and that we can increase funding for education, for prisons, for law enforcement, for health care, and all those important programs. That's what we need to do. So you're right, there's all kinds of creative ways of going, but we have watched that in the past, that it actually has backfired. You know, and Minnesota, my friend Jesse Ventura, he did that. He went in there and with such great joy, he gave the money back to the people, and then all of a sudden he ran out of money, and he never ran again for governor. He says, wait a minute, I didn't know that this is going to happen to me. So it's a very complicated thing. So in a way it's complicated, but in a way it's easy. But besides the budget reform, we also have to look at, and I'm sure you will agree, at the way we are taxing. I mean, we are missing a lot out there. There's a whole new economies that are developing, service-oriented economies. Manufacturing is going down and is disappearing. There's a lot of changes that are happening in California and all over the United States. And I think that California or any state or any city should always reevaluate. What do we have here? Are we really up to date? And then reevaluate the whole thing and make the changes and be courageous to make the changes, because so many times people in a political arena, they get scared, and because they're running for something again, and all of this, so they don't want to make the move, and they don't want to go out there first and start talking about it. I talk about anything. It makes no difference to me. I just throw it out there, and of course you get the attacks from the outside, but you know something? I'm still standing here. I still feel healthy. I still feel good about myself. I feel good about, my life and everything like that. So be it. The other day someone asked me about nuclear power. I said, yeah, I think we should look at nuclear power again. It's crazy. Because 30 years ago, there was an accident. Technology has changed. We're all talking about rolling back the greenhouse gases. We've just, a report came out where, that utilities is producing, the second amount of pollution. And, transportation is the number one with 34%. So since we know that, why wouldn't we go and look at, is nuclear power a new way of going, and is the technology there where we don't have that much nuclear waste, and can we build them smaller and not that big, and can it be safer, and all of those things? Let's look at it. France produces 84% of its energy from nuclear power. Let's look at it. So, of course, the next day I got phone calls and says, how could you recommend nuclear power? I said, relax. Just come down. The only way we can get the pot stirring and have people debate over those issues is if I throw those ideas out and if we throw those ideas out. And we've got to be courageous about those things. Doesn't mean we have to build tomorrow a nuclear power plant. There maybe is 80% of the California people that say no, and then we don't build one. It's that simple. It's not a dictatorship. But I throw out those things, and I feel good about it, that I don't hold back, because I don't look at myself like, I'm going after a political career. I don't go after political career. I stopped my acting and my Terminator movies because I wanted to come in and help California, because I felt I have the personality and that I have the courage and I have to know how to bring people together and how to move the state forward. And that's what we have been doing. So anyway, you have one more question and then we have to finish. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for being here today. Laura Hoffmeister from the Concord City Council. A couple of items I wanted to bring to your attention when you're talking about reform. I know former Assembly Member Joe Campbell, when he was, or not Joe Campbell, Joe Cansamilla, when he was there, one of the things he had talked about was trying to see if we can get the state legislature to look at a 2-year budget cycle, and in 1 year focus on the budget for that 2-year horizon. The second year would be legislative matters, and maybe limit the amount of legislation they introduce in the first year so that they can really focus on the budget and do budget reform and get that into place. And I think that would be something hopefully that you could advocate for as part of your budget reform ideas. The second item is that I think you've been talking about budget cuts. I'm going to take the other tactic. I would support some revenue enhancements. There's operation and maintenance costs with everything in the state in terms of keeping our infrastructure, our quality of life. We hear from our residents, they want to maintain the quality of life. That's what we love here about California. You and your wife's commercials about, California that I've seen on TV are really great. But I think we also need to look at how to create a revenue enhancement and where might we find those revenues. And I was disappointed to see that the Assembly didn't quite pass, I think, the what I would call the soda pop and potato chip tax. There's a lot of things I think we can do for health care to try to free up some of those monies that are being cut away from health care if we were to look at taxing. And when I talk to people and kids, they're like, they'll pay tax on a candy bar. I mean, candy and chips and soda and all that stuff is what's helping bring down our health care issues. We've got diabetes, we've got heart issues. We can try to use some of that money to maybe augment the health care programs in the county, what was talked about by John Joya here earlier. So I think that there's a balance that needs to be taken. It's not just cuts, but we also need to look at some appropriate revenue enhancement, close the loopholes, and let's look at some other things. It's got to be a little of both. It's not going to be all on the cut side and all on the revenue side, but we got to look at also some revenue enhancements. So I appreciate you saying that you're open to ideas, and hopefully you would be able to encourage your Republican colleagues to maybe look at those items and not just say, no, we're not going to talk about any taxes, because it's going to have to be give and take on both sides of the aisle.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for your question. First of all, I think the 2-year budget cycle, you're absolutely correct. I think we have talked about that in the past. It never happened. But I think that this year it could very well be that we are revisiting then again. And I will bring it up, especially since you reminded me now. I think this is what is so great about those town hall meetings is because, ideas like this come, fly back and forth, and great ideas come out of that. I think this is an absolute must, not to do budgets just for 1 year, but to look at it in a 2-year cycle, and we're going to look at that. The number 2 thing is when it comes to taxes, as I said before, everything is on the table and looking at all those different possibilities. But there's 2 ways of looking at all of those things, as you know. You say, look, people like services. I think, therefore, we should increase the taxes so we can provide those services. Someone else may say at the same time, it says, well, wait a minute, there's another way of going. It is, let's provide our services more efficiently, more cost-effectively. And there's another way of looking at it. So I think that maybe there's room to look at both of those things. If it is in education, if it is in law enforcement, if it is in healthcare, in all of those different programs, I think we can deliver services better and we can deliver services more cost-effectively so that we don't always have to go to the people for more revenues. Because you can ask the people in California, any poll will show you that are very much against increases in taxes. As a matter of fact, I want to challenge anyone out there. And I want to just say that by April 15th is, tax day where people have to pay their taxes. So anyone that is for tax increase, please voluntarily send extra tax money to the state of California. Send the money, we need it, but do it voluntarily. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here today. Okay, thank you.